Today I'm going to be taking a look at the Meanders Plus map series again. This would be kind of like a part two. Essentially, we're putting line of sight on some maps that were furnished by the Map Hatter, formerly known as Game Tile Warehouse. He has recently closed his website down, although he is still active behind the scenes. I think he's going to be going to university. We did a show with him on All Things Fantasy Grounds with Rob 2E about a week ago. And occasionally I'm going to do these videos to kind of go over the process. And I think it's good for the community to kind of understand the approach and how to put this stuff together. So without further ado, I wanted to kind of start from the beginning. So if I go back down to the launch screen, I want to make sure though first that I have the options on to restore Windows on start. So I don't want to have to redo everything and reset up everything. So I went ahead and do that. It's like I'll set up the table and then I'll turn that on. That way everything goes back to where I had it. Also, this is not the 5e rule set. This is just the standard core RPG because we're just doing maps. So I don't have a bunch of overhead and a bunch of stuff loaded up. And then usually what I'll do is I'll theme the dice according to whatever product I'm doing. So in this case, I'm going to theme the dice for the Meanders Plus logo. So I'm going to click on body and I'm going to use this golden color. So use the eyedropper and just kind of hover over and then it changes the color of the dice. And then I'm going to take the text and do the same thing, but I'm going to use some of this blue color. So again, I'll use the eyedropper and then I'll come over and grab some of this blue from the logo itself. So this will kind of give it a little bit of character and branding, so it's kind of related to the product. And then what I'll do is change it to something a little bit fancier as far as design goes. So if you own some of these, you can change the dice. So this is just something you can do to kind of theme your games. But I'm also doing this for the show. So from here on out, I'll be using this theme and this branding and the whole 9 yards. So I don't have to change that anymore. I'll go ahead and close that. I'm going to minimize this a little bit. And this is the asset window where all of the maps are going to be put into. So I want to go ahead and start over. So I'm going to go down to the launcher. The correct way to exit Fantasy Grounds, if you're new, is right-click, go to exit session, and then return to launcher. That's the safest way to exit, so it will save your database files and such. If you just X out of it and Fantasy Grounds hasn't saved yet, you might lose some of your work, so you want to be careful with that. So just kind of a little precursor here. So I'm going to load the campaign. This is already made, but essentially this is a separate play campaign. So, I mean, a work campaign. So I have one where I'm actually showing the work and testing things out and playing and such. And then I have a work folder where I'm actually doing the work, the putting the line of sight on, putting the files in, all that stuff. So that's an important step. And the only extension I have for development is the theme. I don't need any other extensions. This is just for building content. The FGA theme, the free one from the Forge, it comes with a larger font, so I don't even have to do that. So I'll go ahead and hit start. But whenever you start a larger project that doesn't involve a bunch of changes or that does involve a lot of changes and such, you want to create a development campaign. And essentially it's separate from your play and your game, and you use it to create content. So when you're done, you can actually export it and use it for your games and not have it polluted or convoluted with all different things. So that's kind of an important step, especially if you're going to do a lot of development. You need a development campaign in order to keep things kind of clean, separate, and without a bunch of overhead. So this has already been done. I did a video previously with these maps, and I do have kind of a map challenge type thing that I do occasionally where I'll grab some maps randomly and put the line of sight on them and practice using the tools. This is going to serve as kind of a dual or triple purpose. So one, I'm doing work with Chris McDermott, Map Hatter. I'm also helping the community kind of learn how to use the tool. I'm kind of doing this for myself, so I have all the line of sight on the maps themselves. We're going to be loading these into the Fantasy Grounds Forge, so any day now, those will start hitting pretty soon. I think Chris said they're going to be around $3 for like 4 maps, and they'll have the line of sight on them. Also, there's still about a week left of his Kickstarter, so if you want to get all the maps for yourself, minus the line of sight, because it won't have that on there. This is a Kickstarter thing. It's kind of like his blowout sale, or kind of like his departure from creating maps for a while. So this is a pretty good deal. It's like $25 at the lowest tier, and you get like 25,000 or 2,500 maps or something like that. It's ridiculous. It's a huge, huge thing. So anyways, I reached out to Chris, and we're both kind of working together on this. So he's sending me files that I need to upload into my campaign session. So let's talk about that a little bit. So I'm going to go into the assets, because this is where the images will be stored. And when you first start off, you'll have something like this. You want to make sure that you're in the images category, and you won't have this campaign folder initially until you start adding files. So I'm going to come down here and click folder. And right here, I have the logo that I'm using. And then this is the maps that I'm using here. And then all of these files here are the definition files for the XML or the line of sight data. So I'm sending these over to Chris when I'm done with them, and then he uploads them into a module, and he does all the packaging and the labeling and all that kind of stuff. So we're kind of working hand in hand, but I wanted you to see the process. So I got a folder called M+ Egypt. So this is the folder that I'm going to be working in. And on the back end here, these are all the files that I've downloaded with the what Chris has offered and supplied me for the Egypt, basically the Egypt set. So these are going to be packaged in groups of 4 to keep the file size smaller. And these are really nicely kind of curated. Chris is going to basically take and put all those maps in packages and do them in little groups. That way they're not too overwhelming, and if there's some maps that you don't want, that sort of thing. So the recommendation is around 100 megabytes for a certain group of files for modules. So you don't want to put 100 files in one module. That's the thing. So I'll go ahead and close this. Now, whenever you add or take away or rename or move things in Fantasy Grounds, you want to hit this refresh assets folder, which is down here on the bottom right. You click the refresh button, and essentially it will update whatever you've added or moved or renamed or taken away. So that's an important step. So I go back in the campaign folder and go back to here, which is where all the images were, where I put them. And these are the images that I'm going to be working on. So I'm going to do one of these so that you guys can see the process and how I'm doing these. And then when you invest in these, maybe you'll have a little bit more confidence as to what they are and what they're for. So essentially, there's a palace, and then there's a river scene, and then there's like a town, and there's a market. So and then there's the Temple of Anubis. So you have different things here that you can use for your maps. So this would probably be 3 or 4 sets according to how we had it planned. So I'm going to do the Temple of Anubis, since this is almost standalone. So I'll go ahead and take this, and what I have to do is add it to the campaign. Right now it's only an asset. So if I want it to be part of the campaign or part of my game, I'm going to add it to the images list. And I have these in no particular category yet, but I should be putting those in a subfolder so that I don't get confused, and so I can actually use it as a filter. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to hit the edit button and click this green plus button and create a group. So I'm going to call this group I'm making is called Cairo City. And then what I'll do is I'll drag the maps from the list down here, and I haven't selected anything. I just have it open, and drag those into that group. And what that does is it categorizes those so that you have a separation between all the different map sets, especially if you've got a bunch of them. This is a good way to organize it. And now I'm going to get out of the edit mode. And when you select that, that'll filter it out. So I'm going to make a new group now. So we're going to call this a temple. And then there's some catacombs too as well. So what we'll do is I'll probably do these catacombs and then I'm just going to do the Temple of Anubis separately. And then I'll do all the river ones, and I'll do the market and then the palace. So that's kind of my plan. So there's a ruined temple, and then there's the Anubis temple. So those will probably go together. And then the rest of them, who knows? But I'll package these up and send them up to our shared drive where we're storing those so that we can work on it together. So what I'm going to do is create a new group, and it always says group 1, group 2 as the default, but I'm going to say, let's see, what do I want to call this? I'll just say Egypt Temple, because I don't want to have 50 gazillion different groups, but I want to have a group for each category. So Egypt temples, something like that. That way I have an idea of what I'm working with. And then when I come over here, now what I'm going to do is take these images that I want to add to it, and I'll add those by dragging and dropping those into this folder here, which is going to create an image file for these. So I'll actually do these two today because they're kind of related. And as you can see, these are now part of the campaign. And this over here was just a preview image. So that's what that is. So now what I'm going to do is start adding the line of sight. So I'm going to go to this temple part first. And the first thing you do on any map is try to figure out the scale if you don't already know it, and also figure out putting the grid on it. In this case, this is, Chris has this set up. I believe it's set for like 75 or 100 or something like that for the size. So what I'm going to do is go to the grid and set this to 75 as a starting point. Usually 50 works too, but I'm going to try 75. Yeah, so 75 is a good happy medium. But again, you know, it depends on your taste, but I'm going to set all of these at 75 because 100 is kind of off a little bit. It's kind of shifted back and forth, and then 50 is too small. So when you add that in there like that, it still lines up. But then this becomes quite a different thing. So 50 actually does a good job too. So 50, 75 probably work. I think the happy medium here would be 75. Just for the overall sake of the aesthetics of it. And then you got to consider that these are 5-foot squares. So the next thing I'm going to do is kind of take this color picker, and I'm going to use one of these colors to kind of make a grid and then kind of back it off so it's not too bright. So I'll use the color picker, and what I'm doing is changing the color of the grid itself. So I'll click that, and that kind of blends it in, but it also themes it for this particular map. Sometimes you don't want that because it gets washed out, but I think this will work. Let's see. So now, once I have that chose, I'm going to go ahead and back it off about halfway. And that way the grid is still there. It's still visible, but it's not too crazy. Like it's not, you know, getting in the way, and you can still see the artwork and all that good stuff. You can use whatever color you want. I'm just trying to show you some methods and ways, processes and stuff that you can use in your own work. So the other thing you want to do is in this drop down where it says toggle toolkit, there is a navigation panel, and this is off by default. This has been changed in the last 6 months. And then you can use the arrow keys now to move this instead of that thing that used to drag around, that gold block navigation thing. I don't miss that. I thought it was a horrible tool, but it was kind of neat, I guess, for its time. But definitely community, most people didn't like it, especially if you had a Mac and you only had or you have a trackpad or something like that. Yeah, that thing did not work. All right, so this is essentially the layout for the beginning of doing your line of sight. So you get everything sized up. get the grid set. That's your priority. Even if you don't do anything else, that's the main thing, is everything kind of goes off of that. So when I say everything, I mean the combat tracker, range, movement, all that stuff goes off of the size of this grid. So that's why it's important to set that up in the beginning. Now what you want to do is figure out what exactly do you want to do with this. Like, are you going to add anything to this, that sort of thing. Now, my personal opinion is I would add like fire to this, that kind of thing. But not everyone has the option to have the Fantasy Grounds art subscription, so I'm going to leave that out, and people can add that themselves. But if I was using this in my own game, I would definitely put a little bit of fire in here to kind of give it some movement. Although if there's something with water, I can add that because that's a universal effect that goes on everyone's system. However, when you do add those kinds of layers to the map, it can create a lot of overhead. So you got to be careful on how much of that stuff you add to your maps, especially if you got an older machine or you got people with lousy internet and all that stuff. So that you got to kind of be judicious with what's important and what isn't when it comes to creating these maps and organizing them and adding effects and assets to them. The more you add, the more overhead over time. It may not impact you right away, but over time, as you add images and maps and everything, it kind of adds up. All right, so we got the grid on. So one thing you want to be careful about when you're adding any line of sight or anything to a specific layer, make sure you click on the layer. I don't know how many times I've done this where I did not have it selected. I started doing line of sight and I realized I got a whole separate layer. I need the layer in this case to be on the map layer. So when I start drawing line of sight, it needs to be on that. If you accidentally click away or onto a different layer, it's not going to work out right in some cases where you're going to have overlapping line of sight. And when you try to use the doors and interact with it, it's going to act goofy. So try to keep it all in one layer if possible. There are ways that you can, add it to a separate layer, but it gets really tricky and complicated and confusing. So try to keep all of your line of sight on one layer if possible. Now the next step is obviously to do line of sight. Normally you have an indoor-outdoor type thing. I don't think that's a big issue, but I think what I'm going to do is do all these pillars first. I'm going to take in this case, this is one of the rare occasions where I can kind of get away with using the ellipse tool and then just starting from here and then dragging it and getting close with all of these different pillars. So I'm just going to left click and drag, and then I'm going to take that and adjust it, or I can just single click and just kind of go around them. But I kind of want that rounded look to it, because if I just click around here, it's not really going to look like a circle. And this is the rare occasion where this looks good. Usually not so good. It just kind of looks kind of phony. Like people do that on trees and stuff, and it really doesn't fit the aesthetic. But anyway, so I'm going to go to the line of sight tool, and I'm in the ellipse tool and the wall tool. So you just left click and drag this out until you get to a circle size that you want. And then whenever you have a selection, which is this arrow, you can double click on all of these. It'll select all the points when you do that. And then you just left click and drag this particular item. I don't think you can duplicate this. Let me check. Yeah, you can't. So I don't want to even go there. But you can't duplicate this, which is unfortunate. But you can do stuff like this to make your map stand out a little bit more. And you can take these shapes. Like I said, if you make a whole complete shape, you can or a line, you can double click to select all of the points. And then you just come in here like that. So what I'm going to do is just draw all the circles around here, and then I'll go in and adjust them and move them into place. So back to this circle tool and back into the wall tool. So the reason I'm doing that, because if you draw it, place it, draw it, place it, you're switching back and forth between the drawing tool and the selection tool and moving it. It's better if you do all the drawing, the lines first, and then move it. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to come over here and start drawing circles. And I don't care if they're all perfectly the same size. Although a lot of Egyptian architecture is very symmetrical, but I'm not too worried about it. This isn't a professional product. We'll get it as nice as we can, but we don't have to be super spot on if we can help. You know, that just makes it to where it's more work than it's worth, in other words. So you want to make it look good, but it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, or you're going to drive yourself nuts. So that's all I'm doing right now, is just kind of drawing out the circles that I'm going to need for this particular project. And that's all I'm doing right now, is just kind of drawing them out, and then I'll put them into place here shortly. Okay, so I got them all drawn out. Now what I'm going to do is go to the selection tool, double click, and then click in the center and just move it into place. So something like that. Same thing here, just double click, move it into place. So this way it's a little bit faster and you're not going back and forth between all the tools. Because that's where you lose a lot of time, especially if you have a large project like this. You got to kind of think about your efficiency a little bit. In most cases, you're just doing one map, whatever. Do whatever. But when you have more than one to do, you got to find a process that's going to make it easier for you and less tedious, because that's really what is annoying about doing any type of maps. If you don't have the time or patience for it, it's not going to be good. Let me tell you that. When I first started doing this, it used to piss me off quite a bit. It takes practice to do this. You don't just walk in and do it. You got to get kind of used to how the tool behaves and how to manipulate the data and where to put things and how much information you want to put in, and there's all kinds of stuff. You got to strike a balance between quality and quantity, and I think you won't learn that until you start using the tool more and more. And that's really the biggest hurdle, is just having the time to sit down and use it. I think that's the biggest problem that most people have, other than the UI complaints, is they just don't have enough time to put into it. And I think that's true of anything. If you have you invested a bunch of money in Photoshop and you never use it, you're probably not going to be that good at it. All right, so that's the line of sight for those particular pillars. Now what I'm going to do is go to the square rectangle tool and do the same thing, but I'm going to draw out here on the very outer part of this. So I'm just going to single left click and just draw it out and try to hit all these points as best as I can. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but I'm going to do my best. And once I feel it's in a good spot, I'll go ahead and let go. So that's pretty close right there. And voila. So let's see if it actually intersects or not, because it may not. Yeah, so this is the problem with using shapes. So there's been some issues on the forums over the last couple of years. So you don't get these intersections. That's what you're looking for. So essentially, that's like another layer stacked on top of another layer. They're not truly connected. So you may not be able to do this sort of thing depending on what shapes they are and such. So if you have two walls and they're two shapes together and you don't actually have these vertices, you'll start running into issues where you got light leaking through and all kinds of stuff. So to get out of that, I'm going to hit Control Z, and that gets rid of that. So what I'm going to do now, instead of doing it that way, instead of doing a big shape, is I'm going to actually do just lines. So that should help with that problem. So I tried to cheat and go around and make a big rectangle. As you can see, it didn't work because it didn't intersect with any of these circles. So that's not good. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I want to make sure I'm in the line tool and the wall tool. So now I'm just going to single left click and I'll draw beyond or past the point that I need to, and then just double click when I'm done. And now you see there is these vertices. That's what you want. You want this to form because then they're truly connected. The way I did it before, by drawing a shape, it didn't really connect. It was kind of like laying on top of the other one. And that's when you start getting those goofy things where the light doesn't work out right or the line of sight doesn't look right. So I've seen that on the forums where people are complaining about that. And I think in some cases that's what they're doing is instead of drawing the whole line out, they're drawing shapes. And that sometimes that creates that problem. I noticed that when I was working on other maps. Oops. There we go. So like I said, if you hold shift, that makes that line straight. You don't have to try to, make it in the pocket as much. And looks like it's fairly decent as far as how far it is from the wall. And now I'm going to do this draw out past it again. So left click and then hold shift and then drag over. And that'll draw this next line. So that makes that a lot easier to do when you're working on images where you need a straight line. And then I'll do that same thing again. Left click, shift, drag, double click, that ends the line. So that's pretty much the majority of the line work. Now what I'm going to do is this part right here, I'm just going to put glass around this. I don't want to put something that's going to block vision, just movement. So this way people can't just walk over this. They have to actually ask to climb up it. And then I might put a little bit of, some kind of blockage up here on the very top. But for this part, for this piece, I'm going to make glass or window. So here's the window. And then I'm in the line tool. And I'm going to just start off one of these points over here and just kind of draw a big pyramid or a triangle and go from there. So just come down, click on one of these points up here on the circle and just kind of come down here and just kind of come up in this area where the lines intersect, and then just come over here and intersect with these. Let me see if this works. Shift tool. Yeah, it works. So all this is going to do is just block movement. It's not going to, they can see through it. There's no shadow or anything. So what I might do is just put a shadow caster up here. So they can still see the statue, but it will cast a shadow if there's any light in here, especially if you have ambient light. So in this case, there won't be any ambient light because it's all indoor. So what I'll do is I'll just put a little bit of the terrain tool up here. It's probably not necessary, but I do want to give that impression that the statue is giving off some kind of statue and you cannot see on the very top of its head or whatever. Maybe there's someone hiding up there, who knows. But in this case, in my interpretation of this, it's going to be to where I'm just going to put a little bit up here and call it good. So I'm going to go into the line tool and the terrain tool this time, and this will block light. So I'll just going to kind of come around here and just kind of trace along the head here. And you probably don't even need this many points, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyways. And there we go. So that's just going to be basically our kind of like our line of sight, or in this case, it's kind of blocking light. So whenever you want to make changes, make sure you go on the selection tool, because I just went in and I was trying to move that point and it draws another line. So you got to break that habit if you're doing that. You got to go up here and hit select and then move if you want to do any of that. To be honest with you, I shouldn't be moving anything right now. I should be focused on getting the map done. But I'm almost done anyway, so I just wanted to show you that. And then these braziers, I might do the same thing here, is I might put a little glass around it. This way, if people insist on moving through there, I can burn them. I'll give them a D6 damage or something like that. But I also want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe these things are a couple feet off the ground. Or you can just leave it open like that. But I prefer to put a little glass around it. So I'm going to do the same thing. Make this a window, and just left click and drag. Kind of make like a circle in here. And you notice it doesn't have to be perfect. You can just left click and drag and get a majority of it. You don't need every single bit of it. And then go to the selection tool when you're done with all your drawing and move these into place. So you can draw them out to get a rough idea of what you want and then move them into place. Because you'll have some areas that are too tight where you can't move the mouse through there very easily. So you can always draw it and then move it in. All right, so the reason I put the glass here is so that when people are moving through the map, they don't just walk through the brazier. And then, like I said, if you have the art subscription or your own animation files, if you wanted to, you could create an illusion of fire. You can actually use water to kind of make this look wavier. But I think that's a really big layer and a performance thing when you're just adding the water effect just to make this kind of move around. But that's a whole mask covering this whole image, and you're only unveiling this area. So I don't think that's worth it. I don't think the exchange rate's good there. Now, if it was a lake or a river or something, that's another story. But for a little tiny area like that, you're probably better off using an animated fire instead of trying to use the effects. Because the effects are very taxing at times, and you get more than a couple of them, it can really add up. So that's just that. And then what I'll do is start cleaning up the rest of this when I'm done with all the line work. So I got most of it done except for the doorway. So I'm going to go ahead and put those in and just kind of put them in at these junctures. These are where the maps would connect. So go ahead and take the rectangle tool. You can use a line now. You don't have to use a rectangle. And then I'm going to go to the door tool and you just left click and draw in some doorways. So this is in case you want to connect the maps. They may not line up perfectly. You can always adjust them if you need to. But in this case, I'm just going to put the doors in just for convenience. And they don't really need to be there, but I think it's important to have something there. Especially if you're new to Fantasy Grounds and you haven't done any of this kind of stuff before, you may want those doors in there. Maybe not. You can lock them by holding when you're in play mode. You can hold the shift key and click on them. So if you don't want your players just to go in and out of any old doors, you can do something like that. And then here's this door here. There we go. So just kind of give you an idea of how this stuff can go and kind of like the process. Just to learn how people work and how they do this kind of thing. And you'll make up your own way of doing it. I mean, just because I'm showing you this doesn't necessarily mean it's the will of God here. This is just the way I've learned to do it. So you guys develop your own methods and your own way of handling it. That's fine. Perfect. I couldn't ask for more. So now what I'm going to do is go in and clean up all these little tails. So this is kind of what people are compelled to mess with these when they're creating this line of sight, and you don't really have to until the end. So I'm going to take the selection tool and you single click. If you double click, it'll get rid of this whole line. So you only want to single click to get rid of the segment between this point and the vertice. So what I'm going to do is just hit the delete key and just come around, and like some of this stuff here, you don't even have to have. I don't even think I need. Let me see if it'll let me. Yeah, so you can get rid of a lot of this. This is the other half of the circle outside of the map, so you can get rid of that. You don't even need that. And you can see this little piece here. Get rid of that. So you can come through at the very end and clean up all your extraneous lines. So you can do this at the very end, so you're not switching back and forth between drawing and moving stuff around and deleting excessive points or inserting points. All those sorts of things add up at keystrokes and time. So you're if you're pressed for time or you're preparing for a game and you only got a couple hours, it really helps to. In this case, I can double click on all of those segments and get rid of that. So you'll find ways to make this more efficient for you. And that's kind of what I'm trying to show you here, is the process and how to make it a little bit easier for you. And it's still work. I don't envy anyone that does this all day long, but it is one of those things that once you get the hang of it, it's not too bad. It is still time consuming, but it's not as horrid as it appears to be until you when you start diving into it and get used to it. It's not as bad. So that is that. And like I said, I'm just coming through here and cleaning up extraneous lines. The reason to do this is kind of to alleviate how many data points that you have on your map. If you have gazillions of these on a map, especially like a cavern, it does impact performance. So that's why I'm going through and cleaning these up. So if you've got like a cavern and there's like a gazillion of these little dots all over the place, then you might notice some lag, and that could be very well be because the map is too big or it's got too many data points on it. So that's something you got to kind of mitigate between what your real actual needs are versus requirements and such. So that one, stubborn. I'll worry about that in a minute. So you'll get something like this. Sometimes it's just easy to leave it. There we go. So I got that out of there. So this is just kind of like my preliminary videos on these, and I'll do these occasionally just to kind of keep up on giving the community some examples and use cases and inspiration and that sort of thing. And then this also kind of advertises these, because once these go up on the forge, they'll be up there for sale. And then it also gives me an opportunity to practice and utilize the tool, right? So I think it's a win-win for me. I mean, I don't see any downside to it other than time, and I'm actually willing to spend the time on this because I'm doing more than one thing. I'm going through and adding the line of sight and all that good stuff. So now something like this, I don't even want to mess with that, because if I come here, it might get rid of that line. So what I'm going to do, if you want to be that nitpicky, you can come through here and remove this line, or you can remove this line here. But what that might do is mess with the door. So you got to be kind of careful with that. So I'm just going to leave that, to be honest. I'm not even going to deal with that, because that could cause some issues. You're trying to be too precise in that case, and it'll drive you nuts. It's not worth it. It's not going to hurt the map at all. So I'm not even going to bother with it. And all I'm doing is taking these segments out, and then on these bigger pieces, I'm double clicking and just hitting delete, getting rid of the excess lines. We don't need those data points, the ones that are extraneous. You don't need them. And all you're doing is getting rid of that extra segment. And then if I double click on all these, they're separate from this. So that'll delete the whole thing. So same thing with this, a single click, get rid of that, single click down here, get rid of that, and then come over here, double click on this middle segment, and then hit delete, and that gets rid of that semicircle there. So this is just a process that I've developed over time. As I started doing these, I said, this is annoying. There's got to be a better way. And after a while, you start learning all the little nuances, and you're like, okay, I'm not doing this crap anymore. So you start working on ways to make this easier on you. And I don't care how you slice it. You're going to spend time, but if you want to cut down on time, you're going to develop some way of doing this. Otherwise, you're just going to spend hours and hours for nothing, for a 10-minute map that you might use for 10 minutes in your game. Okay, so we're getting there. Almost done. We got a couple more. We got a few more actually. So yes, it is tedious. There's no getting around that. But it can get better if you are someone who, oops, I accidentally deleted the whole thing. So I hit Control Z to get out of that because I accidentally got rid of the whole circle. I only meant to single click, not double click. And now I'm going to double click on this half circle here. And then I got a little bit of a mess here. So what I want to do here is see how this is not connected there. So I want to drag that over and connect it to that line. That way it's not a big mess. Yeah, so this is what I was talking about here. You don't even have to worry about that. That's not going to make any difference in that case. And that's just glass anyway, so I'm not going to worry about that. So I'm in the selection mode right now, not in any drawing tools. So that's an important habit to break. When I first started doing this, every time I touched the map, I was in the wrong mode. I was trying to draw lines when I'm in selection mode, and then I was trying to move or delete points when I was in the drawing mode. So you got to kind of break that habit if you're doing that, because that's one of the first things I could not figure out. I was like, what the heck am I doing wrong here? And I just kind of got used to, instead of drawing, dragging, moving, drawing, drag, I just started doing all the drawing, all the moving, and all the deleting in groups instead of onesie twosies, because that's where you lose a lot of time. If you got a little map and it's only one map, I mean, who cares, right? But if you got a bunch of them, that's where you start losing a bunch of time. And I think that's something that most of us don't have a lot of, is time. Okay, so that's done as far as I'm concerned. I think that's basically the gist of it. What I might do now is I'm going to put 2 torches on top of these and call it good. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and add the torches to this layer. Usually though, when I make my own maps, I will put them on a separate layer if they need to be independent of other rooms. But in this case, they're all going to be the same, in the same chamber. So I'll just put the lighting on there. So in this case, I'm just going to put 2 torch lights and call it good. There could be a torch up in here. Maybe you can make the eyes glow or something kind of cool like that, but I'm going to leave that for the game masters. But if it was for me, I would probably make these eyes glow or move around or something weird. But in this case, I'm going to go to the lighting tool, and then when I'm going to go over to the add light, and then I want to drop down to the preset of a torch, and then just single click in the center and call it good. And that's pretty much a done deal. So once I'm done with that, I'll lock that if I need to. And once you've locked that, you don't want to try to draw on top of it because it'll make a new layer. So don't lock this until you're completely done, because I've done that to myself where I locked it because I was worried I was going to move it. But then I ended up going back and going, oh, I forgot a line. And then I realized that I just drew a whole bunch of stuff and I had to redo the whole. I had to make sure I was on the correct layer, in other words. So I'm going to go to play mode and turn on the line of sight. And this is basically what it's going to look like from the player view. And then if the players insist on going through the fire, you can open the window up and they can walk through. Same thing with this. If they want to climb up this surface, they can. And it's pretty dark right now because there are, you have this very minimal amount of light here. So when the players move around, the statue of Anubis will show. So that's just kind of gives you an idea. And then let me turn off the line of sight, disable that for now. And I'm going to check the doors, make sure those are working. Yep, so there's a door, there's a door, there's another one. Yeah, so these are all the doors. So that's basically how you do that. Now when you're done, if you're working with someone else or someone gives you a map and they want you to do all the labor on it, like I'm doing right now, you can right click and click export metadata. So what that does is it creates a file based on the name or the file name of the actual image. So in this case, M plus Egypt Anubis Temple. You do not want to change that. It needs to match the image name. And these are the XML files or the definition files that go with the maps. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save and move on to the next map. So that's basically the process of creating this. Now, if this campaign is only going to stay on your computer and you don't plan on working with anyone else, you don't have to do the export. This is only if you're given a map to do and you need to pass it forward to someone else. That's another story. Now, when you're done putting the line of sight on here, and let's say you've done all the maps, you can save it and then export it as a module, and then you can load this in any games you want. So that's the idea behind the development campaign. So maybe in a year from now, I'm going to have a majority of these Meander maps already ready to go. It's going to be a large campaign folder. I'm not going to share that or export it or anything like that, but I will have all these things done, or most of them. So that'll be kind of cool. In the that's kind of my long-term goal, is kind of have these all done, but in groups. I don't want to do it all at once. That's way too much work. So the next map I will do probably is this one here, which is the obelisk. I don't really need to do much to it. It's only going to be like maybe a little bit of terrain on it. So if I go to images and go to this ruined temple, this might be the top of this temple here. So maybe this is how you get into this Anubis temple. This wouldn't take much of anything. I would just follow the contour. I'd probably just use a little bit of terrain and then follow this contour. So I'll go ahead and do it now since there isn't much to it. So I'll go ahead and click on this. Again, I want to put on the grid. I'm going to set it to 75 like the other one. And you can set it to 50 or 100, whatever you want to do. But I think 50 and 75 are a good compromise. And now, again, I'm going to take the color picker and take some of the color from the map. Let's say some of this lighter color, and use that for the grid. And then what I'll do is take and I'm going to close this because I can see it underneath. Okay, so take that, and then what I'll do is dial it down a little bit so it's not too bright. And then probably just follow the contour on this one. This is a real kind of a no-brainer type thing. You don't even really need line of sight on it, but if you're going to do so, probably just so you can't look on top of this unless you crawl up there. So what I'll do is use this drop down, turn on the navigation panel, kind of get this to the point where I can see what's going on with it. And then what I'll do is take the line of sight tool, go to terrain, and I'll just go to the line tool and just kind of come up here and take this and just kind of loosely kind of come across this. And then that's it. That's basically the line of sight on there. Because this side, you technically could probably see it. And this side here is the top side of it, if you want to call it that. And then you have the shadow cast right here. So technically, you could just use a shadow caster, but you have to have ambient lighting on in order for the shadow caster to work. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on ambient lighting, and then I'm going to go ahead and do sunlight. And then when I go to this mode, which is play mode, and turn on the line of sight, you kind of start, you can see some of the shadow in here. And what I do is the artist quite often will already have the shadows built into these. So I try to emulate that in the lighting panel. So going back to lighting, go back to light. You can go to this ambient lighting, and you can change the length of the shadow. So in this case, it's not going to really do much to it, but here's the length of it. So I try to get it to emulate, how the same direction as the shadow that is cast from the original. and then I'll play with the length to kind of match what's already there. That's pretty close. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's close enough. And that's really the done deal. Now all I have to do is right click on it and export the metadata, same thing, and put that on there. So there wasn't much to that. It's just a desert with like a stone plaza ruin and then an obelisk. So it's really nothing to it. If you really wanted to get detailed, you can maybe put a little bit of, terrain on here, or maybe some of that glass so they can't walk right through these big chunks of rocks. But other than that, I don't see any point in doing it. Maybe you want to treat this like a wall here, a portion of a wall. You could do that, like maybe it's fallen over. So it just depends on how you want to interpret it. But I think this is good enough. It just kind of blocks lighting here. And if they want to climb on top of it, then you can reveal it to them. So you would just do that, and whoever's climbing up will get to see over on the other side of it. So essentially you can use this for like cover. All right, so that's it. That's basically the first 2 maps in this series that I'm going to be working on. And later I'm going to do a bunch more. I'm not going to televise or stream it, but you get the idea. I think I'll do maybe one more video in this series, maybe when I do the river, because that'll have water. And then the rest of them are just buildings and stuff and huts. And there's like a little, let's see, this has a catacomb with a river going through it. So that's pretty cool. Anyways, hopefully that helps. Happy Friday. You guys take care, and I'll see you around next time. And I don't know exactly when these Meanders Plus series will be actually on the store, but we're working on it. I think the first set's going to be going up soon. So if provided there's no issues with it, and we'll make an announcement when that time comes. So take care.